This is the Brave New Coin Crypto Conversation, hosted by Andy Pickering.
Hi everyone, Andy Pickering here. I'm your host and welcome to the Crypto Conversation, a Brave New Coin podcast where we talk to the people building the future in the blockchain and cryptocurrency space. Now today I'm joined by Dave Hodgson, a director at NEM Ventures, which is part of the NEM Enterprise blockchain ecosystem. NEM Ventures has a mandate from the NEM community to invest in blockchain-related startups to help strengthen the wider crypto space and, of course, the NEM ecosystem. Dave is based in Scotland, which is nice because the Scots make excellent whiskey and I do enjoy a single malt. I also enjoyed this chat with Dave. We talk about his role at NEM Ventures. We talk about their first investments in an NZ crypto startup called Vimba and also in a Florida-based startup called IODLT. Plus, we talk about Catapult, which is the upcoming update of the NEM blockchain. We talk about some of the features that Catapult enables and also the emerging security token offering model. And we finish with another round of crypto hot takes. So, hey, please enjoy the episode. Please smash the subscribe button and let's get into another crypto conversation. Hi, Dave. Thanks for talking with me today.
Hi, Andy. Thanks for having us here.
So, Dave, you're the head of NEM Ventures, and as I understand it, NEM Ventures replaces the NEM Community Fund, which was more of a DAO, right? A decentralized autonomous organization. And the NEM Community Fund had a large pool of XEM tokens, and the role of the fund was to fund new ventures. And it did this with a community voting system which was run by volunteers, and this is there was some problems with the process, wasn't it?
Yeah, essentially got too popular was the main problem. I should probably just really out of decency correct the introduction as being the head of NEM Ventures. I just happen to be the one that speaks in public more often. We actually have a very flat structure, so there's 3 of us that had the mandate from the community, and there's a team of predominantly 5 of us that do most of the work, but it's a very flat structure. But yeah, the NCF, or the NEM Community Fund, was essentially a community grant scheme which had a filtering mechanism of a committee, which then went out to community vote to decide who would be a recipient of those grants. Because it was being run by volunteers, obviously there's an upper limit as to the number of proposals that they can realistically do due diligence on and process. And as we came through the bull market, the value of the fund increased such that we were getting an awful lot more proposals in. So the 3 of us took a proposal through that same community vote system, basically to formalize it into an equity or a venture capital type entity. The other side to that as well is through the crypto bear. Obviously those tokens, like all the rest of them, fell in value. And we're dealing ultimately with a finite resource in the community fund. So we needed to move from a position of effectively giving out free money to ensuring we had a financial return from those projects that were successful in order to then be able to continue investing in projects in the future. So anytime we take a profit on any exit, it goes straight back into the trust and then flows back down to support future projects. So it's a bit more of a closed loop, if you like. And yeah, essentially it was to help the volunteers deal with the increasing workload, basically.
Sure, and what I think this speaks to, Dave, is it's almost like the messiness of human interactions. You know, when you get a group of humans together and on a voluntary basis, and you add in monetary incentives and voting rights, it's quite hard to design systems that work for everyone and take account of, the flaws of human behavior. And I think over time, this is one of the promises that blockchains and DAOs, they're trying to solve. They're trying to take the kind of the faulty human decision making out of the process, but obviously we're not quite there yet. But what I was really impressed by in terms of from the NEM perspective is the NEM ecosystem is there's all these different websites, forums, discussion groups. Everything is in a way you could describe it as sort of, open source and documented online. So I was having a little deep dive into it yesterday, and you can, your comment history is there. Anyone can go back and sort of see. It's a very transparent process, and I think that's quite admirable.
Yeah, it's one of the things that attracted me to the ecosystem at the start. As I said, I was doing an options analysis originally, and in addition to having all the functionality that we needed, the supporting ecosystem and the community wrapped around the blockchain impressed us at the time that we were doing the options analysis as well. And it's something that we've endeavoured very hard with NEM Ventures to be as transparent as possible. And I know the NEM Foundation or the new council that have taken over this year have made similar strides forwards and similar promises to the community as well. So we post everything up on the NEM forums, including the results of jurisdictional analysis. And I don't know, we like to try and be as open as we can. Obviously, there's limits to that where you have things that are commercial in confidence, and some of the due diligence we do, obviously, we have to keep private. But anything we can surface, we generally do.
So in a way, Dave, it's like that, that fantastic scene in Pulp Fiction when the wolf, played by Harvey Keitel, he comes in, he's the cleaner. He's very smooth, efficient. He's got his rules and his processes, and he knows how to operate in a chaotic environment. That's kind of you, Dave. You're the cleanup guy. You've come in. You are the consummate professional. So you've now, as the, let's say, the spokesperson, as you say, for NEM Ventures, and you and your team have put, you've turned NEM Ventures into more of a professional, the VC arm, I guess, of the NEM ecosystem, with all the necessary transparency and, rigorous rules and processes that should entail. So what then is the role of NEM Ventures?
Yeah, it's really simple. It's basically to enhance the NEM ecosystem by investing in companies that either build on NEM or in some way add to the ecosystem. So typically those companies will be, if they're building on NEM, could be anything from very early stage pre-seed startup through to probably about Series A, I think is the most mature that we've seen so far. Because of the size of the fund, I would struggle to envisage a point in Series B where we would be very heavily invested, although we would potentially still look at going in. If they're not building on NEM, then we have a lot more freedom, obviously, to interpret what that contribution to the ecosystem might be. So that could be an infrastructure play that brings debit cards, for example, that allow you to spend XEM, or, wearable devices, or a consulting arm that has, or consulting company that has product development and other branches to its commercial operations. So that the breadth of that definition is fairly wide, but at its core, it's basically just to enhance the ecosystem with companies that are doing good stuff on NEM or with NEM.
And so the first announced investment was in a little New Zealand company called Vimba, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. The Vimba was at the top of the list for the NCF backlog. So it was a fortuitous position. So
I think maybe it'd be worth just explaining for the listeners, from your perspective, from an investment perspective, what you saw in Vimba, what were the positives that made it a green-lit investment, I guess. And just, my background to this is I would just disclose that I'm personally a fan of Vimba, and the first Bitcoin that I ever bought was through the Vimba platform. And so I think it's a really good platform, and I'm interested to see, what the NEM Venture perspective is. Yeah, to be honest, you've kind of encapsulated in that statement. So essentially, Sam, the founder of Vimba, opened it, I think it was 2014 from memory. It's been a few months since I did the DD, with a very simple but quite elegant vision to basically make it easier for people to get into cryptocurrency that don't understand crypto. And he will take them from a point of not understanding, for example, how to create a wallet, to understanding how to manage their private keys, how to send monthly payments to Vimba and then receive digital assets in return. And you can get Bitcoin, Ethereum and XEM now on the platform. But essentially what got us most interested in Vimba was that Sam had a really clear vision as to where he saw the company going. He'd already proven it in a relatively comparable market.
Then once we dug into the details of the company, we actually found that the crypto winter hadn't impacted Vimba as much as it had some of the competition in terms of volumes that they were selling. So all in all, it's a really nicely packaged up company, and it's in a really good position, ready to scale. And yeah, the team just inspired a lot of confidence, had a really good plan.
Yeah, look, I agree, Dave, and just again as a full disclosure for the listeners, Tekami, which is I guess the parent company to Brave New Coin, is also an investor in Vimba, so we'll just point that out. But listeners, if you are interested in, if you're not already in the crypto ecosystem, Vimba is a pretty good platform, and dollar cost averaging is probably the smarter way to get involved, especially as a new person to the crypto ecosystem. So if you're interested, have a look. I think Vimba.co is the website. Yeah.
I think that's right from memory, yeah. They've actually just launched a new feature as well, probably 2 weeks ago, that allows you to set up regular savings for other people or for additional accounts. So, for example, for your kids, if you were setting up like a trust fund type saving.
So what's next on the investment horizon for NEM Ventures then? Are you working on any deals that you can talk about at the moment?
Probably the most recent one I can talk about was announced today, that we've invested into a company called IODLT. It's a young company based out of Florida in the US, and essentially they're building business-to-business applications with a combination of IoT devices and blockchain. The founder is a very active member of the NEM ecosystem, has been for some time, and has developed a system by which he can connect various different types of sensor to an IoT device like a Raspberry Pi or Arduino type device, and have that device write directly to the blockchain, and it can cope with being on or offline at the same time. So those sensors could do things like, measure the blood sugar level in a blood test, or it could be measuring temperature in a shipping container or whatever, and then writing those conditions back to the blockchain, so you have immutable proof of what the sensor was actually finding without dealing with any central intermediary. And the application of that type of technology really does cross an awful lot of different industry boundaries. The company's just at very early stage, so it'd be classed as a pre-seed investment, but we're expecting within the next 12 months to see a pilot launched in healthcare at this stage.
Nice, that sounds interesting. And so I understand that project is building on the NEM Catapult blockchain. So I want to talk a little bit about that, Dave. So NEM is an enterprise blockchain, right? And it's I think it was originally designed to be simple to use and developer friendly, plug and play, they say. But in doing that, there's a trade-off. So if you make your toolkit too simple, what happens when someone comes along and they say, I want some fancy new features. I want to be able to do atomic swaps or issue my own security token or, whatever it is. So in other words, you need an upgrade, right? And that is what NEM Catapult is all about?
Yeah, so the NEM version 1 had a bunch of features that didn't exist on most chains. In fact, some of them still don't exist on most chains. So things like being able to code in basically any language that a full stack developer is comfortable in, having on-chain multi-signature, being able to issue tokens without having to involve a developer. All that stuff already exists right now. So those type of things are all coming across onto Catapult. But we have a release candidate coming out late Q3, which we're expecting to be more likely than not the final version, which goes on to public chain. Obviously, it's going to be subject to a large amount of testing and migration planning and all that kind of stuff. But we're expecting it to launch on public chain late 2019. And that brings with it various different features, a couple of which you touched on in the summary there, where we will support atomic cross-chain swaps, both between NEM private chains and the NEM public chain, NEM private chain to private chain, and also to Ethereum and Bitcoin. So it means that, or any network essentially that supports that type of transaction, which is a secret lock transaction. So any chain that's based off Ethereum and hasn't changed the code base too much will also probably be supported. Essentially what it means you can do is transfer data and or value between chains in a kind of an escrow-like transaction. So you lock up value or data on one chain and release it on the other one, And then when you want to send it back, you lock it up on the second one and release it back on the first one. So at no point is the data in the ownership of the same person on both chains, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense, Dave. But I think what you're talking about is because I guess in the wider context of where we're at in the blockchain space, so if Catapult is the NEM update or upgrade, and then Ethereum, they're looking at doing something similar. They've got a hard fork coming down the line. And so the idea is that all these different blockchain protocols are upgrading, hard forking, or however you want to put it, with the idea being that they become more secure, more able to scale, support a wider feature set. And the idea is that we're moving into this world where these blockchains are able to interconnect and be interoperable, right?
Yeah, exactly. And there are multiple chains that are moving in that general direction. And realistically, I think it's a natural direction for the industry to go in. Ultimately, the biggest achievement for any technology is when you get to the point at which you're largely invisible to the end user, and the company that's offering the service to you has managed to hide that technology in such a way that all you see is the UX. In order for blockchain to get to that point, one of the key connectors is interoperability, along with all the other feature sets and the security and the scalability that needs to be there to be trustable. It just adds that extra layer of functionality for the developers and the product owners to come up with new visions for what it is they want to enable. We've also included a feature in there called Aggregate Transactions, which for those from an Ethereum background is probably a bit more similar to smart contracts. It's certainly not a Turing complete smart contract approach, but essentially it allows you to stack multiple transactions one on top of the other, up to, I think it's 25 in total. And unless every single one of those sub-transactions completes, the entire transaction won't complete. Now, that might seem fairly innocuous and almost irrelevant when I describe it that way, but the use cases for that start to make it possible to hide the technology. So if you want to transact on the Ethereum or the NEM blockchain, for example, you would need the native currency in order to pay the fees for that chain. One of the things the aggregate transaction would allow you to do would be for the app developer to pay the fees on behalf of their customer, and then they might go and buy those tokens through a monthly subscription, etc. But from the customer's point of view, they never had to actually hold the native currency in order to use the application. So those aggregate transactions would allow that type of functionality to kick in, which again, it starts to get more seamless for the end user. And when you couple that kind of stuff up with the atomic swaps from not just us to other chains, but also private chains to public chains on NEM, it means that enterprises can start to adopt those chains internally for systems that they might contain data that they don't want publicly visible, but they still want to reconcile up to the public chain for some specific reason. So it allows you to start enabling those types of use cases.
Whether you're an enterprise fund manager or a retail trader, buying and selling cryptocurrencies successfully requires price discovery you can rely on. Brave New Coin's liquid indices provide trusted US dollar prices for Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Ripple. Featuring end-of-day or intraday outputs, you can count on the BLX, ELX, and XRPLX for accurate US dollar pricing for smart contract oracles, settlement price discovery, net asset valuation, and performance analysis. Visit bravenewcoin.com to find out more.
Dave, just to, for listeners who are perhaps a little less technical, is there another use case that you could explain that is enabled once we, enter this world of interoperable blockchains? What are the use cases?
Yeah, so a really obvious one is something like a self-sovereign identity solution. Obviously, one of the other companies in the group of Techemy is Spear, who essentially have a solution which allow you to prove who you are to a trusted party who then validate that on chain. Now, if you have the ability for any other blockchain to interact with Spear's solution on chain, then the use case that could be enabled would be you would only have to use that self-sovereign identity solution once, and then you'd be able to utilize the data across multiple chains. So I might be able to go and trade security tokens on Ethereum today, buy Bitcoin tomorrow from Binance, and buy XEM off Vimba the day after, but using the same identity, because that data was capable of migrating across chains effectively. It's not exactly how Spear works, but at a conceptual level, that type of stuff starts to become possible.
Nice.
Other types of examples would be things like the MakerDAO project are moving towards collateralized lending and sort of kind of traditional finance-like products, but backed by crypto. If you're able to lock up value on one chain and release it on another chain, then you could get into the position where you could take out a collateralized loan for dollars, for example, by putting up Bitcoin, Ethereum, and XEM, and then they hand out stable coins, for example. But because that's all locked up on chain until you give them back those tokens and release it, then it kind of stays in escrow, if you like.
That's right, and so it's really about building out, what we like to call Web 3.0 or decentralized financial economy, the brave new world of blockchains. So to me, it feels like obviously we have Bitcoin, which is obviously the original blockchain and by far the largest, most successful, and the most valuable decentralized, censorship-resistant blockchain. So you've got Bitcoin, and then there's an awful lot of utility token projects, and some are more interesting than others, shall we say, and leave it at that. And then there are sort of 4 or 5 other major protocols that feel like they're doing something interesting and have a place to play in this new world. So, you would have Ethereum, potentially Ripple XRP, obviously NEM, maybe EOS, maybe Tezos. Would you agree with that? Where do you see the kind of medium-term future going?
Yeah, I think that's really fair. There's a couple of chains in there like Waves and Stellar as well who are starting to carve out specific niches for themselves. And I think ultimately probably the sort of top 20, top 30 coins there are, I would think about half of them that could do something serious in the mid to long term and still be around. And obviously NEM is included in that group. I think the immediate next wave that we're likely to see chains proving themselves on are either interoperable moves or security token type raises, or the genuine utility level of things like Binance Coin, which obviously have a level of utility that's a bit different to some of the tokens we might have seen 2 or 3 years ago. But I think probably to answer your question concisely, I think probably as we see this security token wave starting with more earnest than it has done recently, there will be 2 or 3 chains that are in that space, and NEM Catapult is, in my view, likely to be one of them. Equally, Stellar is probably going to be there. ETH is more likely than not going to be there as well. And then on the interoperable side as well, so we've got things like Chainlink, NEM's cross-chain swaps. I think it's going to be very interesting 2 or 3 years as we see, to some extent, some consolidation or some rationalization of the number of options around. And I actually think potentially we may even start to see some merger and acquisition type behavior between some of the chains.
Yeah, and interesting you talk about the security token offerings, Dave. So let's talk about that a little bit. So obviously, we're moving on from, I guess, the ICO cycle, the ICO bubble of 2017. ICOs have now fallen out of favor. Many of those projects have failed to live up to expectations, and most of those utility tokens are down 90 odd percent from their highs, and perhaps they bleed even more each week against Bitcoin. But so now we're seeing this emergence of, right now, the IEO model, where exchanges are listing the tokens, and we're moving into, as you say, the security token offering, or STO model. Can you talk a little bit about this? So what is the advantage, perhaps, what's the difference between an STO and an ICO or IEO?
Yeah, so probably the easiest way to think of it is that an ICO is basically like crowdfunding, where somebody puts up, in some cases, a 10-page PDF and promises to do some stuff, and a bunch of people send them some money. Now, quite a few of the projects were an awful lot more serious than that, but quite a few of the projects were exactly that as well. The IEO is kind of the next step up from that. So you've got larger trusted players in the industry now, like the likes of Binance and OKX, etc., who are effectively vetting and doing due diligence on the projects, not giving you investment advice to say that you should invest in them, but saying in their opinion that this project is serious and that they're prepared to list the token on launch and that they're prepared to get involved with the token launch which conveys a level of trust that wasn't there during the ICOs. So that broadly describes the IEO. And then the STO is something, in my mind, really quite different. So the STO is more of a digital version of what we have in the offline world already. So it might be an equity or a bond or property or a floating charge over a bank account that has actual cash in it. So it's more like a traditional security, but it's represented digitally. So the ownership rights and everything that come with that type of underlying ownership move with it. That's one side of the STOs. And actually Malta, I think it was yesterday, came out with a suggested bit of legislation that referred to those as traditional security tokens, which is weird because the term's only been around for about 18 months. And they now have this new idea of securities for basically anything else that could be represented digitally and assigned some kind of ownership rights. So you might be talking about things like AI bots having fractional ownerships of, I don't know, Tesla EVs, for example. That doesn't fit naturally under the current securities regulation. So some of the jurisdictions are now starting to handle how they write legislation for that type of token. But at its core, most of the time when people are talking about STOs, they're just talking about a digital representation of something that traditional investors are comfortable with as a security. The advantage that an STO or security token comes with is that you can trade that cross-border with no problems. So I'm not listing on the FTSE or the Nikkei or the Nasdaq. I'm listing on an exchange which is global anyway, and I can buy and sell that cross-border without any problems. They're, in my view, should only be listed on regulated exchanges that have complied with the securities regulations of the nation states in which they're domiciled. Most of those naturally are going to come out of the jurisdictions that are more favorable to distributed ledger technology and blockchain in the short term. So you're looking at places like Gibraltar, Malta, Bermuda, to an extent Estonia, Singapore, Switzerland. But in time, you could easily see those exchanges popping up elsewhere as well. And I have now seen the first STO pass through the German regulators. So Bitbond managed to launch successfully on Stellar. There have been a couple of others that have launched recently as well.
So just to recap that, so the advantage of an STO is they're obviously legal, so there's not the regulatory uncertainty of the ICOs. A security token, you have more financial participation rights and actual digital ownership of the asset represented. Can you also speak, Dave, just to what's the time frame here? Obviously, we're just kind of entering into this STO phase now, and also secondly, can you speak to how Catapult supports the STO issuance process?
Yeah, so the time frame is an interesting one, and it varies depending on the news of the month pretty much. But we've had the first, probably not more than 5 that I'm aware of that have launched already. So we're already just at the very early ebb of that wave. I think probably we're looking at more like a 12 to 18 month timescale for that to really become more normalized and acceptable under national regulation. We will see a gradual increase pretty much from now over the next 6 to 12 months. And the national regulators out of particularly the bigger OECD countries are to some extent going to dictate how fast or slow that happens. It's going to happen. It's just a case of how quickly or how slowly. And in terms of NEM Catapult, so we have adopted the verified token framework, which actually Techemy, Brave New Coin and Blockchain Labs were all involved in creating, which is effectively a cross-chain framework for how protocol level chains could approach security token issuance and how regulated exchanges could list the tokens and the type of behaviors that are needed to wrap around that industry to make it work. So things like making sure we have appropriate anti-money laundering and KYC checks, appropriate levels of verification of investors being accredited or not, for example, in the US. And the way that NEM has chosen to approach that framework adoption is in stages. So it's expected on day one of Catapult that we will support the basics of what is required to launch the security token. And then over time, we'll bring in the rest. The initial functionality that I expect to be there on day one is the ability to add metadata to an account and to a token. So that allows you to, for example, denote that certain accounts can buy a token or cannot buy a token, you would have to enforce that logic off chain, or the exchanges would have to enforce that logic. But the base building block is there to allow you to do that. You could lock the distribution of the token or the passing on of the token. So for example, if you sell to US investors, under certain circumstances, you're not allowed to allow that token to transfer to a secondary owner within the first 12 months. And in order to do that, you need to have some level of either on-chain locking or off-chain logic that everybody agrees to abide by. So NEM have gone for the on-chain logic with that one.
That's right. And listeners, if you're interested in exploring that verified token framework further, this is a white paper for that. It's online at verifiedtokenframework.com. Hey, Dave, it's been fantastic talking to you today. Thank you very much for your time. Can we finish on a round of rapid fire crypto hot takes?
Go from it.
Dave, where do you sit on the Bitcoin maximalist to multi-coin opportunist spectrum?
Somewhere around about the middle. So Bitcoin's a great store of value as a transactional currency right now. It has some challenges, so we need the other chains around to help it.
Dave, Facebook's Libra coin, good or bad for the crypto ecosystem, and why?
So regardless of your opinion of Facebook or not, being good for society or not, the Libra project, in my view, will be good for the industry in general. It's going to push some regulatory boundaries. It's already making the regulators uncomfortable because they have to take a position. It's something we've wanted as an industry for 3, maybe 5 years now, and it's great to see them bringing the regulators in. Plus, they've already proven that they don't really care about the regulators to an extent and have challenged them in court on other subjects. So it's going to push boundaries for us.
That's right, and that's great to see. The crypto asset space in general become part of the political discussion in the US. And speaking of which, Dave, putting you on the spot, what happens in the 2020 US presidential election? Who wins?
Let's hope Satoshi or somebody we haven't heard of yet.
I like it. Dave, universal basic income as a potential fix for AI-induced automation and loss of jobs. Good idea or bad idea?
Really good idea if you manage to do it well. To date, I've yet to see anybody actually really hit that target. But in theory, why wouldn't we want a society where everybody has a good standard of life?
Sounds good to me. Dave, which person, group or company is successfully applying the most leverage to the crypto space right now?
I would think probably the futures guys on the Chicago exchange.
Yeah.
Based on the volumes I see coming through when those guys are open, I'd say it's probably them.
Nice, works for me. Dave, Bill Gates famously said, we tend to overestimate what we can accomplish in 2 years and underestimate what we can accomplish in 10. What does the blockchain space look like in 10 years?
Hopefully frictionless mass adoption, and essentially blockchain and DLT in general helping to remove all of the various inefficiencies we've got with central agencies.
Nice. Now, Dave, William Gibson said the future is here, it's just not evenly distributed. What's an example of the future being here right now, but just, most people don't know about it?
Probably to an extent AI. We all think we know about it, but I actually think the guys who are deeply involved in the middle of it probably can see an awful lot of stuff coming an awful lot quicker than the rest of us.
Absolutely. Dave, let's zoom out. What's the long-term future for the human race? Do you see dystopia or utopia?
Probably something in the middle, and it'll probably be fairly unequally distributed, really, if we're honest. But thankfully, Elon's going to take us to Mars, so it's fine.
And finally, Dave, can I ask you a personal question?
Yep.
Because as I understand it, you are based in the rural wilds of Scotland. Dave, are you a whiskey man?
I am, and my nearest distillery is about 5 k's away.
Which distillery is that?
It's Ben Romach. It's a very small one. The whiskey's not very good either, but they're close by.
So you are you fond of a single malt?
I am, probably more fond than I should be. But I grew up in Speyside. I live in Speyside. There's a lot of whiskey around here.
Yeah, there is indeed. Yeah, my 2 rabbit holes to spend time down, which I haven't been able to ever find the bottom of, are obviously the Bitcoin crypto rabbit hole and the single malt whiskey rabbit hole.
Yeah, I'll share that one with you, man.
Awesome. Hey, thank you very much, Dave. Can you just tell the listeners where they can find yourself on the various platforms, or NEM on the various platforms? Anything you want to say, go for gold.
Perfect. Cheers, mate. Yeah, so the easiest place to find NEM Ventures is at the website, nemventures.io. All our social media links, etc., in the top right of that site. And similarly, the ecosystem has a couple of other partners as well. So we have the NEM Foundation, which will be the main website that you find if you Google NEM, nem.io. Those guys have got all the developer resources, educational type materials, roadmaps for Catapult, most of the sort of public branding and awareness type content. And pretty soon you'll also start to see more content on NEM Studios, which is the protocol level dev shop, which is being set up at present. So there'll be a couple of pretty interesting announcements coming out on that one in the next week or two.
Looking for near real-time crypto asset spot rates for everything from Tron to Monero or Doge to BNB? Brave New Coin's GWA and MWA crypto APIs calculate a fair price for over 1,500 assets and 6,000 pairs across the global network of crypto exchanges. At 30-second tick intervals and available via streaming or REST API, Brave New Coin's GWA and MWA APIs deliver independent third-party price discovery you can rely on.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Dave. And thank you for listening, listeners. This was the Crypto Conversation for Brave New Coin.